She thought Yellowstone would heal her heart after a painful divorce. But what she found in the forest was far darker than her past. 10 years. A decade is a lifetime. It's long enough to build a home, to raise children from infants into individuals, to weave your identity so tightly with another's that you can't tell where you end and they begin. For Abigail, that decade was her entire world. It was soccer games on Saturdays, family dinners every night, and the comfortable, quiet rhythm of a shared life. She had been a wife, a mother, a homemaker. These weren't just roles, they were the pillars of her existence. And then, in a matter of months, they were all kicked out from under her. The divorce wasn't just a separation, it was an amputation. It was cold, clinical, and brutal. She was told the house, the one she had painted, decorated, and filled with memories, had to be sold. She was told the finances which she had entrusted to her husband were a tangled mess, leaving her with almost nothing. After 10 years of marriage and 2 kids, she lost everything. Not just the house or the money, but her past, her present, and any semblance of a future she had ever imagined. Her sister Sarah took her in without a second thought, but the guest room, meant to be a temporary refuge, began to feel like a prison cell. For a year she lived in that limbo, a ghost haunting the edges of her sister's happy, functioning life. The boxes weren't just clutter, they were a daily, suffocating reminder of everything she'd lost. Each night was a battle against her own mind, a relentless replay of arguments, betrayals, and failures. Sleep offered no escape, only restless tossing and turning. She was broken, adrift in a sea of grief and confusion. The woman who once managed a household and a family couldn't summon the energy to unpack a single box. She was searching for something, anything to grab onto, a sense of purpose that had been stripped away along with her marriage. She applied for jobs, dozens of them, but her decade out of the workforce rendered her invisible to potential employers. Each rejection email was another small death, another confirmation of her newfound worthlessness in a world that had moved on without her. Then, a single glimmer of light appeared in the suffocating darkness. Her only friend in town, a college roommate she'd recently reconnected with, had promised a 2-week hiking trip along a stretch of the Pacific Crest Trail. For Abigail, it wasn't just a vacation, it was a lifeline. It was a chance to escape the boxes, the pitying looks, the 4 walls of the guest room. It was a chance to feel her own strength, to be battered by the elements instead of her own thoughts, to feel small against the vastness of the mountains, and maybe, just maybe, find a piece of herself out there. She spent weeks planning, poring over maps, and buying gear with the last of her savings. It was the first time in over a year she had something to look forward to. The trip was a beacon, pulling her forward. But just days before they were set to leave, the beacon was extinguished with the casual cruelty of a simple text message. The friend had to cancel. No real explanation was offered, just a vague apology that felt like a slap in the face. The hope that had sustained her for weeks evaporated in an instant, leaving a void even colder and darker than before. And beneath it all, a deeper, slower-moving tragedy had been unfolding. This entire time, while her own life was imploding, her mother was quietly, bravely, losing a war. The diagnosis had come years ago, but now the battle was entering its final, agonizing stage. Her mother was dying of cancer. The hospital visits became a grim ritual, the scent of antiseptic, a permanent fixture in her memory. She would drive to the oncology ward, put on a brave face, and sit for hours, watching the woman who gave her life slowly fade away. She read magazines aloud, recounted stories of the kids, and pretended not to see the pain in her mother's eyes or the exhaustion that clung to her like a shroud. Each visit was a fresh wave of anticipatory grief, the horror of knowing that this too would be taken from her. The cancellation of the trip, compounded by the imminent loss of her mother, was more than a disappointment. It was a cosmic joke, a sign from the universe that she was destined to be utterly and completely alone. That night, after leaving the hospital, she couldn't bring herself to go back to her sister's house. She just sat in the car, parked in the rain-swept, near-empty lot, the engine silent. The weight of it all, The divorce, the lost home, the absent children, the cancelled hope, the dying mother, pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. She was alone again, adrift in the wreckage of her life with no shore in sight. In that moment, giving up felt like the only logical choice, the only possible escape from a pain that had become unbearable. She almost gave up. The thought was no longer a fleeting shadow, but a comforting presence, a quiet promise of peace. She was still sitting there hours later when her sister, frantic with worry, found her. Sarah didn't yell, didn't lecture. She simply opened the door, knelt in the puddle beside the car, and took Abigail's cold hands in her own. She saw the terrifying emptiness in her sister's eyes and refused to let it win. It was then that her sister told her, "Look at me. I know it hurts. I know you feel like you have nothing left, but that's not true. You have you. And you are stronger than this pain. You are stronger than all of this. You can do this. You have to. For your kids, for Mom, for yourself. You're stronger than you know. Go on that trip. Go alone. Prove to yourself that you can. God will protect you. He hasn't abandoned you." The words weren't magic. They didn't erase the pain, but they were a lifeline thrown into the abyss. The idea was terrifying, insane even. Go alone? But in her sister's voice, Abigail heard not just love, but a challenge. It was a dare to fight back, to take one small step in a world that had tried to bring her to her knees. For Abigail Thorne, this wasn't just a trip. It was a pilgrimage. A 30-day solo trek through the heart of Yellowstone's backcountry, a journey she'd meticulously planned for over a year. It was a way to recalibrate her life, to wash away the noise of the city and the sting of a recent heartbreak. Her sister Sarah remembers her fierce determination. She'd later tell investigators that Abigail was searching for something she couldn't find in her everyday life. A sense of quiet, of self-reliance, a silence she believed only the vast, untamed wilderness could offer. So she packed her bag. Each item was chosen not just for function, but as a declaration of intent. The water filter, a promise of purity. The high-altitude tent, a shield against the elements. The journal, a vessel for the transformation she was certain would come. And the compass, a brand-new brass model, was her symbol of control, a tool to ensure she would never be lost. She was convinced that with the right gear and the right mindset, nature was something that could be managed, even conquered. It was a belief she held with the unwavering conviction of someone who had never truly been tested by the wild. Her sister drove her to the edge of that wilderness. The two-lane road unspooled before them like a final thread connecting Abigail to the world she was so eager to leave behind. The conversation, Sarah recalls, was a delicate dance around the dangers that lay ahead. Sarah would point out a news article on her phone about a surprise blizzard, or mention the park's robust grizzly population. Abigail would counter with statistics about her tent's wind resistance and the decibel level of her bear whistle. It was a conversation they'd had 100 times, a familiar script of loving concern met with confident rebuttal. But as the mountains grew larger, swallowing the sky, a quiet tension settled in the cab. For every mile that brought Abigail closer to her dream, it took her a mile further from the sister who was her anchor. At the trailhead, their goodbye was brief, packed with a lifetime of affection and anxiety. A tight hug, a whispered, "Be safe," and a promise to call every single day. As Sarah drove away, she watched her sister in the rearview mirror, a small figure shrinking against the vast, indifferent backdrop of the park entrance, until she was gone. It was the last time she would ever see her in person. At the ranger station, the official warnings were more direct. The ranger, a man named Dave Hastings with 2 decades of service in Yellowstone, laid out the realities of her chosen path. He spoke of the trail's unforgiving nature, the sudden violent shifts in weather that could trap even the most seasoned outdoorsman. He detailed the necessary protocols for bear encounters, emphasizing that this was not a zoo, this was their home, and she was an intruder. He approved her itinerary, but his pen hovered over the final leg of her journey. "This part here," he said, tapping the map. "After day 10, you'll be entering the thoroughfare region. We call it the Zone of Confusion. Your GPS will be useless. Your satellite phone, unreliable. Your cell phone will be a paperweight. Beyond that point, you're on your own, completely. He stressed the importance of the trail, the thin ribbon of packed earth that was her only guarantee of safe passage. The woods here, he warned, they can play tricks on you. People get turned around. Stick to the trail no matter what. You step off that path, and the odds of us finding you drop to near zero. Abigail listened, nodded, and signed the waiver. To her, it was a formality. To Ranger Hastings, it was a ritual he'd performed too many times, a quiet prayer for a safe return that he knew wasn't always answered. The first 10 days were perfect. Just as she had imagined, just as she had written in her journal. The wilderness welcomed her with its most benevolent face. The sun was a constant, warm presence. The wildlife kept a respectful distance. She felt her strength and confidence swell with each passing mile. Her body, hardened by months of training, moved with an easy, powerful rhythm. The air was clean, the vistas were sublime, and the solitude was exactly the tonic she had craved. Every evening, like clockwork, she would find a high point, unpack her satellite phone, and call her sister. She hiked, laughed on the phone with her sister, sent photos of turquoise rivers and majestic mountains. Her voice, captured in voicemails Sarah would later treasure, was filled with a pure, unadulterated joy. She spoke of the eagle she saw hunting over a canyon, the taste of wild strawberries, the profound peace of watching the sunset alone. She was thriving. She was proving to herself and to the world that she was capable, strong, and in complete control. The wilderness was not conquering her, she was becoming one with it. It was a honeymoon period, a golden hour that seemed as if it would stretch on forever. But then, on the morning of the 11th day, the connection was broken. She was in the middle of describing a herd of elk to Sarah when the line filled with static and went dead. At first, it was just an annoyance. She rebooted the phone, climbed to a higher point, and held it toward the sky, waiting for the familiar chime of a satellite lock. But nothing came. The signal bars remained empty. The screen's no service message felt like a judgment. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, absolute, and profound. The safety net she hadn't even realized she was relying on had been cut. For the first time, the sheer scale of the wilderness around her didn't feel inspiring. It felt oppressive. The mountains no longer looked majestic, they looked like walls. The 10 days of blissful connection had created a new kind of dependency. Now, the silence she had sought felt like an accusation. The transformation she had come for was about to begin, but not in the way she had ever imagined. She had reached the part of the trail the ranger had warned her about, the place locals whispered about in hushed tones, a place that doesn't appear on any official map under its colloquial name, the Dead Zone. For centuries, this specific valley has been the subject of unsettling folklore. Local tribes spoke of a place where the spirits of the earth were unsettled, a valley that would confuse the mind and lead travelers astray. Later, fur trappers and prospectors told tales of strange magnetic anomalies and disembodied sounds. According to local historian Dr. Alastair Finch, the area is a geological anomaly, rich with magnetized iron deposits that can wreak havoc on navigational equipment. But the legends go far beyond geology. They speak of a cursed valley where compasses spin uselessly and voices echo through the trees. Abigail, a creature of logic and preparation, initially dismissed the compass's erratic behavior as a fluke. She tapped it, shook it, and set it on a flat rock, expecting it to settle. But the needle continued its frantic dance. A knot of cold fear began to tighten in her stomach. She was now truly untethered, navigating by sun and instinct alone. And as the afternoon light began to fail and the fog grew thicker, she heard it for the first time. A sound that didn't belong, not an animal, not the wind. It sounded for just a moment like a whisper. For 11 nights, the silence of the Whispering Peaks wilderness had been a comfort to Abigail, a vast, empty quiet that she had sought out. But solitude has a way of sharpening the senses, making them vulnerable to sounds that don't belong. On the 12th night, that comforting silence was broken. She wrote about it in her journal, how the peace she'd found was starting to feel thin, like a sheet of ice over something deep and dark. She said the woods didn't feel empty anymore. They felt like they were waiting. It began with a single sharp crack of a twig, loud enough to cut through her sleep. She lay perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs, straining to listen over its frantic beat. And then it came again. Footsteps, slow, heavy, circling. It wasn't the four-legged gait of a deer or a bear. This was bipedal, deliberate. Each step was weighted, measured, pressing deep into the frozen ground. It made a full rotation of her small campsite, a predator assessing its prey. From her journal entries, we know she was terrified. She considered shouting, making noise, but a primal instinct kept her silent. She described the feeling of being evaluated, of being studied. The entity outside wasn't trying to be stealthy. It wanted to be heard. For what felt like an eternity, she waited. Finally, summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, she moved. The sound of the zipper was deafening in the sudden stillness. But when she opened the flap, no one was there. The clearing was empty. The air was still and cold, holding no trace of another living soul. Only the faint, metallic scent of ozone hung in the air, a smell she couldn't place. Sleep offered no escape. The following morning, the pale light brought not relief, but confirmation of her fears. The campfire she had meticulously put out the night before was disturbed, the ashes kicked aside with an almost contemptuous force, and around it, pressed into the damp, cold earth, were tracks. She found bare footprints around her campfire. They were impossibly large, impossibly clear, too big to be hers. The footprints were the first piece of hard evidence that something was deeply wrong. They were approximately a size 17, but wider, with a splay to the toes that wasn't quite human. The depth indicated an individual of significant weight. But the most disturbing part, they were barefoot, in near-freezing temperatures, in terrain covered with rocks and roots. It's not just improbable, it's physically impossible without sustaining severe injury. There was no blood, no sign of distress. The discovery shattered her remaining sense of security. The wilderness was no longer a neutral entity. It had an inhabitant, an intelligence that was now focused squarely on her. The next 2 days were a blur of paranoia. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow thrown by a passing cloud, sent jolts of adrenaline through her exhausted body. She packed up her camp in a frantic hurry, leaving the footprints behind like a scar on the landscape. Her goal was no longer exploration, it was escape. By day 14, food was low, the terrain brutal. The forest had become a disorienting maze. Trails she marked on her map seemed to vanish, landmarks would shift. Her compass, once a reliable guide, now spun uselessly. The Whispering Peaks are known for magnetic anomalies that can affect compasses, but what Abigail described in her journal was something else entirely. She wrote about walking for hours, only to end up back where she started. It's a classic sign of extreme psychological distress, but it's also a recurring theme in the local folklore of the area, stories of the woods actively misleading those it wishes to keep. She was on the verge of collapse, rationing the last of her food, when a flicker of movement caught her eye. Hope, sharp and painful, surged through her. That's when she saw him, a man in a ranger's coat standing between the pines. But as she squinted, the relief curdled into confusion, then dread. The uniform was wrong. It was an archaic design, something out of a black and white photograph. He stood with an unnatural stillness, not like a man resting, but like a statue placed in the woods. He didn't speak. He didn't call out. He only smiled and beckoned her deeper into the forest. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile of ownership, of secrets kept. It said, "I've been waiting for you." It's a phenomenon we see in long-term survival cases. The mind, stripped of all control, will latch onto any external source of direction. He presented himself as an authority figure, a guide. In her depleted state, the compulsion to follow would have been almost irresistible. It was a calculated psychological trap. She followed, half curious, half terrified. A part of her knew it was a mistake, but that part had grown small and weak. The larger part, the part that craved an end to the uncertainty, took control. She put one foot in front of the other, her eyes fixed on the dark coat moving effortlessly ahead of her. But with every step, the woods grew darker. This wasn't the natural dimming of a dense forest. The light itself seemed to be absorbed by the trees. The air grew heavy and cold, and the familiar sounds of the wilderness, the birds, the insects, the wind, died away into an oppressive silence. The old legends of this region speak of thin places, where the veil between worlds is worn away. They describe a figure, a guide who appears to the lost. But he doesn't lead them to safety, he leads them deeper into the heart of the anomaly. Once you accept his invitation, the stories say, the path back to your own world closes behind you. The forest began to change its very nature. The bark of ancient pines seemed to twist into agonized faces. The ground underfoot softened, becoming spongy and strange. The air grew thick with the smell of wet earth, ozone and something else, something metallic and sweet, like old blood. The world she knew was dissolving around her, replaced by a landscape born from a nightmare. Twisted. Wrong. Her journal, later recovered by rangers, ended with one final line. He's not human. He's... She never came back. Some say she was taken by a predator. Others believe she was claimed by the ghost of Yellowstone's lost souls. All that's certain is this. Would you dare hike Yellowstone alone? Her remains were found after 8 months. Later, she was laid to rest near her sister's village. Her notebook was given to the Yellowstone Mini Library. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget subscribe and like. Thanks.